A sturdy fence makes for good neighbors. But when the thief is already safely inside your property line, the only thing you need isn't a new padlock. It is a highly calibrated steel trap. My name is Victor Sterling. I am 64 years old, and before I retired, I spent 4 decades as a commercial land surveyor right here in Austin, Texas. My entire professional existence was defined by absolute precision, by measured topography, established strict legal boundaries, and ensured that property lines were respected down to the exact millimeter. I do not rely on gut feelings or emotional assumptions. I rely on hard data, verifiable coordinates, and the black ink in my spiral-bound pocket notebook. It was a mild Thursday afternoon in late October. I was out in the backyard of my property near Lake Travis, wearing my faded local baseball cap and sipping black coffee from a chipped ceramic mug. I was taking a quiet break from restoring an old lawnmower carburetor in my garage to prune my prize-winning climbing roses. My property is expansive, featuring my main residence and a smaller, gray-shingled guest house tucked discreetly behind a dense grove of heritage oak trees. 8 months ago, I handed the key to that guest house to my son-in-law, Kevin. Kevin is 31. He describes himself in his social media bios as a serial entrepreneur and a crypto investor. In reality, he is a loud, arrogant parasite who spends most of his day curating a fabricated wealthy lifestyle online. He produces nothing of actual value. I tolerate him for one reason only. My daughter, Chloe is 29, a dedicated emergency room nurse who works exhausting 12-hour night shifts just to keep up with the mortgage on their downtown apartment. When Chloe came to me, exhausted and dark circles under her eyes, asking if Kevin could use the empty guest house as a star-stud office to get his new business off the ground, I agreed. I didn't do it to support his delusions. I did it to get him out of their apartment so my daughter could finally sleep in peace during the day. But as I stood by the rose bushes at 2:15 p.m. that afternoon, my surveyor's brain was fixated on a glaring mathematical discrepancy. In my left hand, I held the monthly utility bill for the property. Autumn in Texas had been incredibly mild this year, with temperatures hovering comfortably in the low 70s. I hadn't run my central air conditioning in weeks, yet the kilowatt-hour usage printed on the paper was staggering. The electric bill was exactly 3 times higher than the historical average for this month. Logic dictated a massive flaw in the narrative. An empty guest house housing a single man occasionally typing on a laptop does not triple a property's power grid consumption. It doesn't cause massive spikes in the daily hot water usage, either. The numbers were entirely out of alignment with the established facts. I pulled my small spiral notebook from my chest pocket and jotted down the meter readings, my mind calculating the possible variables. My eye was about to walk back into my garage to inspect the breaker box when a sound broke the quiet suburban stillness. Clack, clack, clack. It was a distinct, rhythmic noise echoing off the flagstone pathway that ran along the far perimeter of my property, a side path that bypassed the main house and led straight to the guest house in the back. I didn't call out. I didn't step out onto the path to investigate. A good surveyor knows how to observe the terrain before making his presence known. I stepped back, concealing myself entirely behind the thick, gnarly trunk of a massive oak tree, and watched. Walking down my private pathway were 2 complete strangers. It was a young couple in their mid-20s, wearing sunglasses, sun hats, and carrying heavy backpacks. The noise was coming from the 2 large, hard-shell suitcases they were rolling behind them. They looked exhausted but excited, clearly tourists fresh from the airport. I watched in silent, cold disbelief as they marched right up to the front porch of my gray-shingled guest house. The young man pulled out his smartphone, squinted at the screen, and then reached out to the electronic keypad lock I had installed on the door. He punched in a 4-digit code. The lock chirped a cheerful green tone. The heavy wooden door clicked open. The couple dragged their luggage inside and pulled the door shut behind them, completely unaware that they had just walked into a private sanctuary. I stood frozen behind the oak tree, my hands slowly crushing the utility bill into a tight paper ball. My son-in-law hadn't just inflated my electric bill. He had handed the coordinates of my property over to the general public. A foolish man reacts to the initial shock of a boundary violation by rushing into a confrontation entirely unprepared. A professional land surveyor understands that before you can legally remove an encroachment, you must document the exact coordinates of the trespass. I did not storm across the manicured lawn. I did not bang my fists against the heavy wooden door of the guest house to demand an explanation from the bewildered tourists. I remained perfectly still behind the rough, heavy bark of the oak tree. I watched the windows of the guest house. The interior lights flickered on. A moment later, the exterior air conditioning unit, the massive, power-hungry industrial compressor I had installed 2 years ago to keep the space comfortable, roared to life, violently spinning to cool the rooms. The mystery of the inflated utility bill was officially solved, but the depth of the betrayal was still unmeasured. I quietly retreated to my garage, sat in my worn leather chair, and waited. At exactly 4:45 p.m., the aggressive thumping bass of a heavy rap beat vibrated through the quiet suburban street, a pristine, leased white BMW M3. A vehicle my daughter Chloe was undoubtedly financing with her grueling 12-hour hospital night shifts, aggressively pulled into the far edge of my circular driveway. Kevin stepped out. He was dressed in his typical StarTow founder uniform, pristine white designer sneakers, tailored jogger pants, and a tight, black, athletic shirt meant to display the gym physique he spent his days cultivating while his wife worked. He slicked back his hair, adjusted a pair of oversized mirrored sunglasses, and casually strolled down the flagstone pathway toward the guest house. He didn't go to the front door. He knew his paying customers were currently inside. Instead, he slipped around the side path, heading toward the small, secluded back patio of the guest house that faced the dense perimeter woods. I moved silently through my garden, using the thick, towering hedges of my climbing roses as cover. I walked softly on the grass until I was standing less than 10 feet away from the patio railing, completely concealed by the heavy foliage. Kevin struck a match and lit a cheap, sweet-smelling cigar, pulled out his smartphone and tapped the screen, putting his call on speakerphone, a habit born out of pure, unfiltered arrogance. The phone rang twice before a male voice answered. "Yo, Kev, how's the empire building going, man?" The voice chuckled. Kevin exhaled a thick gray cloud of smoke, leaning casually back against the cedar railing of the patio. "Bro, it is an absolute gold mine," Kevin bragged, his voice dripping with unearned superiority. "I just had a new couple check-in today. I've been pulling in $4,000 a month consistently on Airbnb. Easiest money I've ever made." "Damn, really?" his friend replied, sounding genuinely surprised. "Does your father-in-law know you turned his property into a hotel? Isn't he like right next door?" Kevin let out a loud, grating laugh that echoed against the trees. "Are you kidding me? The old man won't notice a thing," Kevin sneered. "He's basically blind. He just putters around in his garage all day playing with lawnmowers and digging in the dirt. Never comes back here. I'm making a killing off his property, and the best part? The idiot is paying the entire electricity and water bill. It's pure profit, bro." I stood perfectly still behind the roses. The nauseating smell of his cigar smoke drifted through the leaves, stinging my eyes. I did not let out a gasp of shock. I did not clench my fists in a blind rage. When you map out terrain for a living, you learn that anger is a useless, chaotic emotion that clouds your vision and shakes your hand. Instead, my eyes narrowed, turning cold and sharp as the pruning shears resting in my pocket. I reached into my chest pocket. I pulled out my spiral-bound notebook and my black ink pen. With steady, deliberate strokes, I wrote down the exact time, 4:52 p.m. I wrote down the exact quote, $4,000 a month on Airbnb. Pure profit. It just confessed to operating an unlicensed commercial lodging facility on my residential property. He had confessed to pocketing thousands of dollars in unreported income while fraudulently offloading his overhead operating costs onto me, and he had done it while actively mocking my intelligence. Kevin continued to brag about his crypto investments to his friend, entirely unaware that the financial ground beneath his feet was already beginning to collapse. I didn't need to hear anymore. I quietly turned around and walked back up the grassy slope toward my main house. The soft, methodical thud of my boots against the earth was the only sound I made. I stepped into my kitchen, locking the back door. I walked over to the coffee maker and poured myself a fresh cup of bitter black coffee in my chipped ceramic mug. I carried the mug into my home office, a room lined with locked filing cabinets, topographical maps, and decades of meticulous tax records. I sat down in my heavy wooden desk chair and opened my laptop. The screen glowed to life, illuminating the quiet room. Kevin thought he was dealing with an oblivious, blind old man. He was about to find out that a land surveyor knows exactly how to track every single footprint left in the dirt. I opened a fresh browser window, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The digital hunt was officially on. Navigating a digital landscape requires the exact same methodical discipline as surveying a physical one. You establish your borders, apply the correct filters, and systematically isolate your target until there is nowhere left for the anomalies to hide. I sat alone in the quiet hum of my home office, the only light coming from the bright glow of my laptop screen. I opened the Airbnb website. I didn't need advanced cybersecurity skills to catch my son-in-law. Arrogant people are inherently lazy. They never bother to properly cover their tracks because they fundamentally believe everyone else is too stupid to look. I entered my own zip code into the search bar. I set the filters for entire place and adjusted the map radius to focus exclusively on my immediate neighborhood near Lake Travis. It took exactly 4 minutes. There, positioned prominently on the first page of the search results, was a listing titled Cozy Nature Retreat, Private Guest House near the lake. I clicked on the thumbnail. The screen populated with a dozen high-resolution, professionally staged photographs. There was the gray-shingled exterior of my guest house. There was the custom cedar patio I had built with my own hands. There was the interior, featuring the expensive leather sofa and the queen-sized mattress I had purchased to make the space comfortable for Kevin's supposed start shop operations. He had even taken close-up photos of my prize-winning climbing roses, advertising them as a private, lush garden view. I scrolled down to the host profile. A smiling, heavily filtered picture of Kevin stared back at me. Beneath his face was a digital badge of honor, Superhost. According to the platform's metrics, Kevin had been operating this listing for exactly 8 months. He had accumulated 68 verified reviews. I opened my spiral-bound pocket notebook and clicked my black pen. I began pulling the raw data from the website and writing it down in neat, precise columns. The nightly rate was listed at $145, not including the exorbitant cleaning fees and platform service charges. Kevin had bragged on the phone about clearing $4,000 a month. Looking at the nearly fully booked calendar for the upcoming quarter, his math was surprisingly accurate. Over the last 8 months, he had illegally generated upwards of $32,000 in gross revenue. And then, the true depth of his parasitic nature crystallized on the screen. I scrolled down to the house rules and check-in instructions section of the listing. I adjusted my reading glasses, tracing the text with my finger. Welcome to your private oasis. Kevin had written, for the best experience, please ensure you only use the gravel path along the far fence to access the guest house. Please do not knock on the door of the main house or park in the circular driveway. The main property belongs to an eccentric, grumpy older relative who values his privacy and hates being disturbed. Please use the back entrance to avoid him. I sat back in my heavy wooden chair. I took a slow sip of my black coffee. The bitter liquid washed over my tongue, perfectly matching the absolute disgust blooming in my chest. He hadn't just stolen my property. He had weaponized my generosity turning me into a cartoonish villain in his marketing materials to keep his paying customers away from the truth. But as my surveyor's brain processed the numbers in my notebook, a much darker, far more lethal reality began to take shape. Where was that $32,000? It certainly wasn't going into his joint checking account with my daughter. Just last week, Chloe had fallen asleep on my living room couch, completely exhausted from pulling 3 consecutive 12-hour night shifts at the emergency room. She had confessed that they were barely scraping by on their mortgage payments because Kevin's startup was still in the pre-revenue building phase. He was lying to her face, was watching his wife destroy her physical health to pay for their lives, while he funneled thousands of dollars into hidden cryptocurrency wallets to fund his leased BMW and his designer sneakers. Furthermore, as a retired land surveyor who had spent decades dealing with municipal zoning boards and property taxes, I knew the law. Operating a short-term rental in Austin requires a specific municipal license, which Kevin did not have. It requires the payment of local hotel occupancy taxes, which Kevin was absolutely not paying. Most importantly, any income generated from real estate must be rigorously reported to the federal government by hiding the revenue in crypto wallets and failing to declare the cash flow. My son-in-law had crossed the line from a lazy, entitled jerk into a federal criminal. He was actively committing tax evasion on my physical property. I closed the laptop screen. I didn't feel the urge to scream. I didn't feel the need to march out to the guest house and throw his belongings into the street. That would be a temporary, emotional victory. I wanted total, permanent demolition. I picked up the utility bill resting on my desk and placed it neatly next to my notebook. I knew exactly what I had to do. Have you ever caught a family member mistaking your generosity for stupidity? Drop a comment below. Because my son-in-law was about to find out that stupid old men know exactly how to ruin your life legally in land surveying. The most critical phase of any major project is never the physical digging. It is the quiet, meticulous drafting of the blueprints. If your calculations are flawless on paper, the execution in the field is inevitable. At 9 a.m. on Monday morning, I walked into my home office and connected my laptop to my laser printer. I did not confront Kevin over the weekend. I smiled at him when he dropped by the main house to grab a free beer from my fridge, and I politely asked how his Startus was progressing. I let him maintain his smug illusion of superiority while my printer quietly churned out 50 pages of damning, high-resolution evidence. I collated the printed Airbnb listing, all 68 verified reviews, the digital reservation calendar, and my grossly inflated utility bills. I placed the stack of documents, along with my spiral-bound pocket notebook, into a heavy manila envelope. I grabbed my faded baseball cap, locked my front door, and drove across town to visit an old friend. Martin Lewis is 66 years old. We have played chess together on the first Sunday of every month for the last 15 years. Before Martin retired, he spent 35 years as a senior auditor for the Internal Revenue Service. He is a man who speaks in tax codes and views the world through a lens of federal compliance. I found Martin sitting in his quiet, sunlit living room, sipping a cup of Earl Grey tea and reading the morning paper. "Victor," Martin greeted, looking up over his reading glasses. "It's Monday. We don't play chess on Mondays. What brings you out here?" "I don't need a chess partner today, Martin," I said, taking a seat in the armchair opposite him. "I need an auditor." I dropped the thick manila envelope onto his glass coffee table. Martin set his teacup down, his curiosity piqued. He opened the envelope and began to read. For 10 minutes, the only sound in the living room was the slow ticking of a grandfather clock and the crisp rustle of paper as Martin flipped through the printed reviews and the utility bills. My ass. He read the exact quotes I had transcribed in my notebook regarding Kevin's offshore crypto wallets and $4,000 of monthly pure profit. A slow, predatory smile spread across Martin's face. It was the smile of a veteran hunter spotting an incredibly clumsy deer. Martin looked up, tapping his index finger against the Airbnb printouts. "Your son-in-law is a catastrophic idiot, Victor," Martin stated, his tone carrying the absolute certainty of a federal agent. He is operating an unlicensed commercial enterprise on residential property he does not own. He is bypassing municipal hotel occupancy taxes, and most fatally, he is actively concealing $32,000 of taxable income in decentralized digital wallets while publicly bragging about it. I want him dismantled, Martin, I said quietly, leaning forward, resting, my elbows on my knees. I want the parasitic rot completely removed from my property, and I want my daughter freed from this financial anchor. What is the precise mechanism? Martin didn't say a word. He stood up, walked into his study, and returned a moment later with his own laptop and a fresh black ink pen. He set it on the coffee table. The mechanism, Victor, is Form 3949A, Martin explained, pulling up the official document on his screen. It is the IRS information referral form for suspected tax fraud. When a citizen submits this form with this level of airtight, documented evidence, it doesn't just trigger a standard review. It goes straight to the Criminal Investigation Division. We spent the next 45 minutes drinking tea and meticulously filling out the federal paperwork. I watched as Martin checked the boxes for unreported income and failure to file. We attached the URLs, the verified income estimates, and the exact physical address of the guest house. We built a federal cage out of paper and ink, and we locked my son-in-law inside it. But dealing with the IRS was only the financial execution. I still needed to reclaim my physical territory. When I returned home that afternoon, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my real estate attorney. Because Kevin had no formal lease, paid no rent, and had flagrantly violated the terms of his stay by running a commercial business, my attorney drafted an immediate revocation of license to use property. It was a lethal, airtight legal document stripping Kevin of any right to step foot on my land, effective immediately upon delivery. My second phone call was to a local commercial locksmith. I scheduled him for a very specific window on Friday afternoon. I sat back in my desk chair and looked out the window at the gray-shingled guest house tucked behind the oak trees. According to the printed Airbnb calendar sitting on my desk, Kevin had a high-paying premium reservation checking in this coming Friday at 4 p.m. The federal trap was mailed, the legal trap was drafted, and the physical trap was set. A massive, devastating storm was quietly gathering directly over Kevin's head, and he was currently inside my daughter's apartment, entirely oblivious, posting inspirational quotes on social media. Part 5-6. Rai hus maidri, en bon en kiorum ton, fel belen lenes. Belenes embordi valamai, belenes, meles, belami. Pulled out of my driveway, the old electronic keypad on the guest house was completely gone, replaced by a heavy-duty, steel-core deadbolt that required a proprietary physical key, a key that was currently resting comfortably in my front pocket. Once the locksmith left, I walked over to the exterior electrical subpanel mounted on the side of my garage. With a satisfying, heavy clunk, I flipped the main breaker supplying power to the guest house. Finally, I logged into my home network from my phone and permanently blocked the guest house's Wi-Fi extender, rendering his smart TVs, digital thermostats, and security cameras entirely useless. The infrastructure was completely severed. The trap was locked. I went back into my kitchen, poured a fresh cup of coffee into my chipped mug, and sat at the small dinette table overlooking the backyard. The thick manila folder sat squarely in front of me. At 4:10 p.m., a large rideshare SUV pulled up to the curb. 4 young men piled out, carrying heavy duffel bags and cases of beer, laughing loudly. They walked down the flagstone path, meticulously following the secret instructions my son-in-law had provided them. They reached the guest house. I watched through the window as one of them tried to punch a code into a keypad that no longer existed. He tried turning the heavy brass handle. It didn't budge. They peered through the windows, only to find the interior entirely dark and completely devoid of the promised air conditioning. 10 minutes later, the screeching tires of a leased white BMW echoed down the street. Kevin threw his car in park, practically leaping out of the driver's seat. He was frantically typing on his phone, marching aggressively down the path toward the confused tourists. I couldn't hear what he was telling them, but the frantic waving of his hands indicated he was desperately trying to play the role of the apologetic host, experiencing a sudden technical malfunction. He jiggled the news steel deadbolt. He checked the dead electrical meter on the side of the wall, his face flushed with a mixture of intense embarrassment and sudden explosive anger. He told the guests to wait, turned on his heel, and marched aggressively toward my back porch. He didn't just knock. He pounded his fist against my heavy glass sliding door. I took a slow sip of my coffee, picked up the thick manila folder, and unlocked the door, sliding it open. "What the hell is going on, Victor?" Kevin snapped, completely dropping his usual fake polite facade. He was sweating profusely, his designer sunglasses pushed up on his forehead. "Did you mess with the lock on the guest house? And why is the breaker tripped? I have highly important investors waiting out there for a weekend retreat, and I can't get them inside." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't match his chaotic, frantic energy. I simply looked at him the exact way a surveyor looks at a sinkhole that is about to swallow a bulldozer. "Those aren't investors, Kevin," I stated, my voice flat and entirely devoid of warmth. "That is a bachelor party from Chicago, paying you $145 a night, and they aren't going inside because that guest house no longer has power, internet, or a door you can open." Kevin froze. The aggressive, entitled posture instantly dissolved, replaced by a panicked, deer-in-the-headlights stare. He opened his mouth to lie, to spin another arrogant web of tech startup jargon, but I didn't give him the oxygen. I tossed the heavy manila folder onto the patio table. It landed with a definitive, heavy smack. "Open it," I commanded. Kevin hesitated, his eyes darting toward the confused tourists, waiting on the path before nervously pulling back the flap of the envelope. The first document, on top, was the high-resolution printout of his cozy nature retreat, Airbnb profile, complete with his smiling superhost badge, and all 68 verified reviews. "You made a critical error in your surveying, Kevin," I explained, leaning casually against the doorframe. "You assumed the property owner was blind. You assumed you could operate an unlicensed commercial lodging facility on my residential land, offload your massive utility overhead onto my checkbook, and hide $32,000 in cryptocurrency wallets, while my daughter works herself into the ground to pay your rent." Kevin's face turned the color of wet ash. "Victor, listen, man. I can explain. It was just a side hustle. I was going to tell you." "Turn the page," I interrupted coldly. His trembling fingers pulled back the Airbnb printout. Beneath it was the heavy legal stock of the revocation of license to use property, signed and stamped by my real estate attorney. "Effective immediately, you have zero legal right to step foot on this parcel of land," I stated. "If you do not leave this property in the next 60 seconds, I will have you arrested for criminal trespass. But that is the least of your problems." My look at the last document. Kevin swallowed hard, flipping to the final packet of paper. It was Form 3949A, the official IRS information referral. It was meticulously filled out with ruthless precision, citing his exact unreported income, his hidden crypto wallets, and his blatant evasion of local and federal taxes. I had a lovely cup of tea with an old friend on Monday. I told him, watching the sheer, unadulterated terror finally register in his arrogant eyes. He spent 35 years as a senior auditor for the Internal Revenue Service. We filed that exact form directly with the Criminal Investigation Division. You didn't just steal from a blind old man, Kevin. You stole from the federal government." Kevin couldn't speak. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The illusion of the wealthy, untouchable crypto bra had completely shattered, leaving behind a terrified, pathetic con artist staring at the paperwork that would inevitably send him to federal prison. He dropped the folder onto the table, as if the paper itself had burned his hands. I took a step forward, looking directly into the panicked eyes of the parasite who had exploited my family. "You thought I was blind, Kevin," I said. my voice dropping to a surgical, icy whisper. But the IRS sees everything, and they're going to love your business model. There is no explosive, cinematic climax when a paper trap finally snaps shut on a white-collar criminal. There is only the pathetic, rapid unraveling of a fabricated life. Kevin stumbled backward off my patio, entirely unable to formulate a coherent sentence. He practically jogged back down the flagstone path to face the bachelor party from Chicago. They were furious. They demanded an immediate refund for their ruined weekend. While Kevin stood there stuttering, one of the guests called the platform's emergency customer service line right from my driveway. Within 24 hours, the cozy nature retreat was permanently scrubbed from the internet. Kevin's superhost badge, his reviews, and his entire digital revenue stream were deleted forever. But losing his side hustle was merely a scratch compared to the devastating federal amputation that followed. The Internal Revenue Service operates much like a master land surveyor. They don't rush. They take their time. They measure the exact boundaries of the fraud, and when they finally drive the stakes into the ground, the borders are absolute and indisputable. 3 weeks after I mailed Form 39490, hey, Kevin tried to buy a coffee, and his debit card was declined. The IRS had initiated a severe levy, freezing his personal bank accounts to secure the massive, compounding debt of his unpaid taxes, civil fraud penalties, and accumulated interest. He tried to access his hidden crypto wallets to survive, only to discover that the Criminal Investigation Division had already subpoenaed the centralized exchanges he used to off-ramp his funds. They locked his digital assets tight. He was instantly reduced to absolute zero. When the federal notices began arriving in the mail, the final pillar of his comfortable existence collapsed. I did not hide the truth from my daughter. The morning after the confrontation, I sat Chloe down at my kitchen table and showed her the Airbnb printouts, the utility bills, and the exact quotes I had transcribed in my notebook. I showed her exactly how her husband had been using her exhaustion to fund his luxury aesthetic. I expected her to cry, but 12-hour shifts in an emergency room build a spine of puritanium. Chloe didn't shed a single tear. She simply finished her coffee, kissed my cheek, and drove back to their apartment. She didn't scream or throw plates. She packed every piece of Kevin's designer clothing into cheap, generic cardboard boxes, stacked them in the public hallway of their apartment building, and had the building superintendent change the locks. The next morning, she filed for an at-fault divorce, citing egregious financial infidelity. Because Kevin had no legitimate, reported income and his assets were entirely frozen by the federal government, he couldn't even afford to hire a decent defense attorney to fight the eviction. In less than a month, the arrogant, wealthy Starthouse CEO was transformed into a homeless, unemployed tax evader sleeping on a friend's couch, waiting for his formal federal indictment. It is now a quiet, crisp Friday evening in late November. The sun is dipping below the horizon of Lake Travis, casting a long, warm golden glow across my expansive backyard. A gentle autumn breeze rustles through the thick canopy of the heritage oak trees. I am standing on the cedar patio of the guest house, wearing my faded baseball cap, using a pair of heavy steel tongs to flip 2 thick ribeye steaks on my charcoal grill. The rich, savory smoke drifts lazily into the cool air. Chloe is sitting across from me at the patio table, wearing a comfortable, oversized sweater. She looks rested. The dark circles under her eyes are entirely gone. She laughs at a joke I just made, taking a slow sip from a bottle of cold, local beer. Resting perfectly in the center of the patio table, right next to my chipped ceramic coffee mug, is the heavy proprietary steel key to the new deadbolt. The guest house is empty again, functioning exactly as it was meant to, as a quiet, peaceful sanctuary for my daughter whenever she needs a break from the noise of the city. There are no strangers rolling heavy suitcases down my private pathway. My monthly utility bill sitting on my desk is exactly where it should be. The borders of my property have been fully restored, the structural integrity of my family secured, and the parasite permanently eradicated. Arrogance is a loud alarm, but justice is a quiet clock. It just keeps ticking until your time runs out. If you believe that parasites eventually destroy their own hosts, hit that like button. And make sure to subscribe for more stories of justice served ice cold.